There's something about people on ships that drives the public crazy. And you can track the history of Canadian immigration policy along a path of boats coming to Canada, moral panic ensues, restrictive legislation is passed. And I think the Komagata Maru is of a piece with that larger phenomenon.
I first heard about the Komagata Maru 20 years ago, soon after I arrived in Toronto. After interrogating me about my student visa, the Canadian immigration officer gave me an unexpected welcome. He said, "The only reason I'm letting you into my country is because you speak such good English." 90 years ago, the Komagata Maru sailed into Vancouver Harbour filled with Punjabi immigrants. They had left Hong Kong 2 months before. Canadian immigration never permitted them to land, and their trip back to India ended in disaster. I realize my interest in what happened to them has become an obsession. The more that I dig through the records, the more fascinated I become. Maybe because here the history of India and Canada violently collide. Maybe because few know that people like me were shut out for decades. Maybe because I see this harbor as a crime scene haunted by its ghosts. And maybe because I'm trying to understand how I fit in. I've heard a plaque in Vancouver pays tribute to those who died for daring to dream of a new life. My friend, poet and writer Sadhu Binning says he knows where to find this plaque.
Most people wanted it in Stanley Park, where you could stand there and see the spot where Komagata Maru was standing for 2 months. But the city didn't allow that, so they chose this place. We jump over the fence. No, we can't go there now.
This is the man, Gurdit Singh, who starts it all, who leads 12 Hindus, 24 Muslims, and 340 Sikhs, all British subjects, into a quagmire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What was Vancouver like in 1914?
Oh, this is the voice of the West, and it speaks to the world. We hold by right and maintain by might till the fall.
I discovered these home movies and newsreels in the National Archives. I also stumbled on the lyrics to this song.
White Canada forever, white Canada forever, white Canada forever, our watchword be God save the King.
White Canada Forever was the most popular beer parlor ballad that summer. May 23, 1914. Immigration officers surround the Komagata Maru and anchor it 1 kilometer from shore. No one can land, the press is barred, no reasons are given. Who are these men? They are farmers, at sea for 2 long months. They are British subjects, finally reaching the shores of a British dominion. They believe they can go anywhere in the empire. They believe in the promises of British fair play and justice. Hindus. Why Hindus and not Indians? In early police records, I find clues. One of the names for India is Hindustan, so people from India sometimes refer to themselves as Hindustanis. For Canadians in 1914, Indians are all Hindus, regardless of their religion. Besides, there are already Indians here, the First Nations, and to call the passengers Indians might remind Canadians that these men were fellow British subjects from British India.
In this period, we're talking about an area that was under British rule, and that area included Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. And as we go through history, those areas get carved out and divided. All those histories are in many ways interconnected.
About 2,000 British Indians live in Vancouver. They line the shore scanning for friends and family members. They know Gurdit and the passengers are trapped in a legal no man's land by the Immigration Act and its continuous journey regulation. Desperate for contact, a few use semaphore, but the police chase the flagmen away. There are no records of what was signaled that day. Enter Malcolm Reed, Dominion immigration agent. He's a political appointee, a former primary school teacher, and a reservist in the local militia. As Canada's West Coast gatekeeper, he wields enormous power. Reed lays siege to the Komagata Maru using patrol boats. Gurdit Singh, who understands the Immigration Act, immediately challenges Reed.
I hereby give you notice, if you do not let me go ashore, you will be held responsible for the damages which I have to suffer. You know that I am a merchant and there is no law to prevent the merchants to go ashore. I have to buy necessary provisions for the steamer. You can detain the passengers, not me.
Businessman, dreamer, Indian nationalist, widower, traveling with his 9-year-old son. Gurdit is known for suing people, but here he's fighting for more than his own interests. When he chartered the Komagata Maru in Hong Kong, loaded on a cargo of coal, and sold tickets to his countrymen, he thought he could realize their dream of entering Canada.
Well, he's probably like everybody who takes something on, you know. But you're going to be noticed. And this did promote him onto a national and international stage. And I think he was aware of that. There's also the strong possibility that he thought in the end he could make some money.
Gurdit fires off more demands to Reed. Little does he know, Reed is just the tip of the iceberg. The man pulling the strings is in Ottawa. In fact, he's the one who got Reed appointed. Federal Member of Parliament, H.H. Stevens.
The Hindu never did one solitary thing for humanity in the past 2,000 years and will probably not in the next 2,000.
H.H. Stevens was a strong opponent of Asian immigration. And of course, his voters supported his position.
It was absolutely a part of the nation-building project for Canada, both to say, these are people who can become Canadian, these are people who cannot. That's part of how we define ourselves as a nation. And on top of that, to say, and we have the power to exercise that.
As Canadian officials ponder how to handle the Komagata Maru, the British Indian community mobilizes in the Sikh temple. Like the passengers on the ship, the majority of Indians on shore are Sikhs. This is what sets Sikhs apart from other Indians, some of whom also wear turbans. The Sikhs follow the teachings of their 10 gurus and their holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib. Their appearance is a part of their distinct identity.
It was the last Guru, Guru Gobind Singh. He wanted to turn the community into a community of saint soldiers, what we call Sant Sipahi. And at that time, it was a tradition of the people who renounced the world and became saints to grow their beards long and their hair long. He made it obligatory. And to abolish the caste system, he gave them one name, Singh. All their caste names which came were abolished. And he armed them because they were fighting the tyranny of the rulers at the time.
This Sikh temple, or the Gurdwara, isn't just a religious place. It is also a community center for all Indians. Most of the early immigrants worked as laborers. Today, some of their descendants, like Jack Uppal, own the mills.
From here, you see the Gurdwara, and the Gurdwara is looking down on me and blessing me.
Jack's father, Dalip Singh, came here in 1906.
I think of my father all the time.
His father had tried to help the passengers on the Komagata Maru.
As I said before, I owe it all to either he or to God.
People in India had been trying to achieve the kind of community that Jack remembers.
The Gurdwara was open to everyone and anyone. It was abundantly clear that anybody of Muslim origin, of Hindu origin, or even the Christianity, people could go there at any time. The community was so small, it wasn't just like a person being of a different religious group or not. As long as he was from the subcontinent of India, we felt that we were all one family.
People have asked me why I want to tell this story. It's a Sikh story, they say, and you're a Muslim, aren't you? I grew up believing in the idea of a democratic, secular India. I thought this dream defined my whole generation. I have watched this ideal disintegrate. In 1914, the Vancouver Indian community was struggling for equality in Canada, but also for a free, democratic, and inclusive India. How radical this vision seems now, almost romantic. One of the members of the Sikh Temple's board is a Gujarati Muslim, Hussain Rahim. He's also a founder of the United India League and a member of the Socialist Party of Canada. Rahim's close friend is the president of the Sikh Temple, Bhag Singh. In 1907, Indians in Canada lost their right to vote. Bhag Singh, a veteran of the Indian Army, forbade community members to wear their articles of British military service in the temple. Along with others, he also burned his army discharge certificate and uniform. Alerted by these small revolutionary acts, British intelligence is keeping an eye on him. It doesn't help that he's also a member of the Ghadar Party, a radical organization fighting for Indian freedom. Incensed by the government's response to the Komagata Maru, Hussain Rahim and Bhag Singh form a shore committee to press for the release of the passengers. Jack Uppal's father was a member of the committee.
This picture is definitely a picture of the people with my dad who participated in the shore committee at the time of the Komagata Maru. This is Natta Singh Mattu, and this is my father, Dalip Singh Uppal. My father was so bitter about the ship. Not only my father, but all the other gentlemen that were here would speak about it, say that once again, that here, we're British subjects, we should have been allowed to stay. We should have been allowed to come freely anyway.
A small group of Indian men on shore is ready to take on the Canadian state. The first thing they do is hire J. Edward Bird, the only lawyer willing to take on the case.
Gurdit Singh is more of a prisoner than if he was in a penitentiary. I have been told that if I put my foot on the gangway, an immigration officer will throw me into the ocean. There is not a single thing from one cover of the Immigration Act to the other to authorize the immigration authorities to take possession of that ship illegally.
Ottawa has given Reed carte blanche to guard the ship. He's hired ex-cops and armed them with guns borrowed from the militia. People in Vancouver call the Komagata Maru a tramp steamer or a rusty freighter. But it is neither, nor is this its first trip to Canada. The Komagata Maru used to be a German ship, first called the Steubenhoek and then the Cecilia. It carried thousands of European immigrants to Canada and the United States between 1898 and 1913. Not a single European passenger was turned away. Then it was sold to a Japanese company. Gurdit and his Indian passengers are now stuck in limbo. No official reasons are given.
To sigh and shed tears in silence was all they could do. Those on board had spent their last penny to reach Canada, where the protection and help of their relations and friends awaited them. Can anything be more tragic and brutal?
Gurdit knows that Canada has been trying to shut the door on all Asian immigration. Panic had been building in Vancouver since the early days when shiploads of Indian immigrants started arriving. The authorities did everything they could to discourage them from settling in Canada.
It was very clear that politicians were talking about a White Canada policy. It was proclaimed every day in newspapers. It was proclaimed in Parliament. John A. Macdonald, in one of his first speeches to Parliament, got up and said, "Canada is a white man's country. We will create immigration policies to create a white man's country."
The anti-Asian riots in 1907 forced the Laurier government into action. But it had to be careful. Canada was still stuck in the empire.
Canada, as such, doesn't control its own foreign policy. To understand then what measures Canada takes regarding the entry of foreign nationals into Canada itself, you have to take into account how Britain would view those policies in terms of its larger imperial interests.
China at that time was, on the international scene, a weak state. And Chinese citizens, to get into Canada, were obliged to pay a head tax. And this exclusion by head tax was insulting. But because the Chinese didn't have the diplomatic weapons to counter that, that's what Canada did.
Japan was a different story. Keeping the Japanese out meant upsetting a powerful imperial ally, one whose ships patrolled the west coast of Canada. So a secret deal was signed. Every year, 400 Japanese would be allowed to enter Canada. Japan, not Canada, would control the numbers. So in the public eye, Canada had no restrictions against the Japanese. Entire Japanese families were allowed to come in, unlike the Chinese and the Indians, who remained in bachelor societies. Gurdit Singh was aware that Indians, like the Chinese, had no leverage.
But what about the Indians who are said to be British subjects, protected by the benign government? We are insulted, we are dishonored, we are disgraced in all parts of the world because we have no government that will feel the indignities inflicted upon us.
Those who were British subjects had the right to move